This is a new memory card. How does it look like it's working to you guys? Good? Alright, let's go in and get started then. Hi everybody, it's Andy, and welcome again to my office in Modesto, California. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York. In this video, I'm going to go over two concepts when it comes to evidence law that I think a lot of people don't quite get, or maybe they understand it, but they think it's academic, highfalutin, for example, not something that really, matters to them. Hopefully at the end of this video, you'll see why it matters, and hopefully it's something that will help you if you're kind of stuck on it. So I'm going to start kind of from a general point, which I think most people should hopefully agree with me on. And it's that in order to prove something, in general, in life, in court, whatever, in order to prove something, you're going to need to have evidence of some kind. And evidence, or a piece of evidence, might be a witness, it might be a photograph, it might be, a receipt, a check, a bank statement, whatever. There has to be proof of some kind. The problem is that not all forms of proof are equal. So the first question of admissibility basically is this. By law in California, for instance, am I, as the judge, allowed to consider this piece of evidence? Has it met all the rules that California law specifies for what evidence is allowed? So in other words, just because something exists in the real world doesn't mean it qualifies as evidence in court. So there are, for better or worse, a lot of pieces of evidence that exist in the real world that cannot be used in court because California law, the rules of evidence, for example, have basically said that this thing over here, this is not reliable evidence. By law, courts in California cannot consider this as evidence. The laws in another state, for example, might say, oh, no, this piece of evidence right here that California won't look at, that's fine. Here, we can go ahead and consider that. So the rules of evidence are what are important, and they will determine what pieces of evidence in the real world can be admitted and considered by a court in that state. California, for example, has the California Evidence Code. The federal courts have something called the Federal Rules of Evidence. Those are kind of more involved to explain than I can in this video right now. But the idea of admissibility, in a nutshell, I guess, is whether or not this court in California, Nevada, the federal courts, whatever, whether or not this court can even consider this piece of evidence. Is it allowed at all? And if it's not allowed, then basically this evidence doesn't exist. Like it exists in the real world, but the court's going to kind of look at it like this and go like, okay, I'm not looking at all this stuff over here. So admissibility actually is very important because if it's not admissible evidence, then the court's not going to consider it. It's like it's not even there. So that's the first kind of inquiry, admissibility. Can the court consider this evidence at all? The second inquiry, which I think a lot of people probably fall flat on when they try to do cases themselves, is weight. And the weight basically means, okay, now that this piece of evidence has been admitted, now that it meets the minimum requirements that the laws of this state or jurisdiction say must be met by all evidence, how much weight does the court give it? How significant will the court find this evidence? So let's say, for instance, that a piece of evidence is admitted. So let's say that a witness has testified in some way. But let's say that the witness is the defendant's mom, for example. And the defendant's mom says, oh, my son's a good boy, he would never do this, etc. Please believe me, Mr. Judge or Mrs. Judge or, members of the jury. Go ahead and please believe me that my son's a good boy, he would never do this crime, for instance. And I would hope that a lot of you would basically go, oh, wait, hey, come on. You're his mom, you're the defendant's mom. Of course you're going to say your kid's a good boy, of course you're going to say he's innocent. That's admissible, but I as the jury member or I as the judge am not going to believe that because every mom will lie for their kid to get their kid out of going to jail, out of going to prison or something. So in those situations, like a witness, for example, or a piece of evidence will say something, but hopefully for understandable reasons, I guess, like human nature, I guess, will basically tell the judge or tell the jury like, hey, yeah, this is admissible, but come on, I don't believe this. Like, this is not significant enough for me to really put a lot of weight behind. So that's actually pretty common, I guess, in situations involving declarations. I don't have a video that goes over a declaration, but a declaration is essentially a document where the person writes out all this stuff that says, yes, I did not do this, or they say some fact, and at the end they put in, like under penalty of perjury, that says, I declare under penalty of perjury in the laws of, or under the laws of California, that the foregoing is true and correct. Technically that qualifies as evidence, but as you can probably imagine, that type of declaration by the accused, by the defendant, is entirely self-serving. So a declaration, at least in my experience, is a very common example of evidence that might be admissible, but is entitled to very little weight. Hopefully it shouldn't be a surprise to any of you, but people lie in declarations quite a bit. Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. I don't mean to say that every declaration is full of lies, but there are a lot of declarations that I've encountered, at least, that with very little effort are proven to be completely untrue. Yeah, so, penalty of perjury and all, the declaration is very easily shown to be completely untrue. So hopefully all of that made sense. Admissibility is one thing, weight is another. A lot of evidence can be admissible, but given no weight. A lot of evidence is not admissible at all. But evidence that is admissible and is entitled to significant weight, hopefully if you're involved in a case, you have a lot of that, or significant amounts of that. So it's something that will hopefully carry the case for you at the end of the day. So again, hopefully that made sense. It's something that I see a lot of people struggling with. But admissibility versus weight, it's actually not a hard concept. Hopefully at the end of this you'll realize it's not a hard concept, but it is something that a lot of people probably have never thought of before. So yeah, anyway, now that you've seen this video, hopefully you're going to be in a better position, now that you realize that distinction. Go ahead and like this video, share it, comment, subscribe, all that type of nice stuff. And I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.